Good morning. We know from the last class that epigraphy is the study of inscriptions. Today we will explore applied aspects of this branch of knowledge, how inscriptions help in the reconstruction of history. The sources of history fall into two major groups, primary sources and secondary sources. Primary sources belong to the period under study and give us a first hand account of the events that took place. For example, the coins issued by Indo Greek rulers are primary sources for their history. Similarly, the Sanskrit work Harsh Charitam by Ban Bhatt is a primary source to the history of Harshvardhan. Secondary sources attempt to interpret or describe the primary sources, and therefore, primary sources enjoy greater authenticity in comparison to the secondary source. Inscriptions are largely treated as primary source of history, and epigraphy thus deals with more reliable sources. Now, sources, as we already know, are further classified as archaeological sources and literary sources. Archaeological sources have an advantage over their literary counterparts as they are found in their original form as left by their issuing authority. It is difficult to change what is inscribed on an inscription, and if somebody attempts to do that it is easily recognizable. For example, you cannot easily modify text of an Ashokan edict which is more than 200 years old from now. And even if you succeed in doing so, in changing some alphabet by inscribing, it can easily be differentiated from the older layers of rock. Similarly, remains of pottery, tools, bones, buildings, etc. cannot be altered from their original state. This makes mute archaeological sources a better storyteller for its audience than the verbal literary sources. Yet, epigraphy alone is not sufficient to reconstruct the past in its totality. It must be remembered that, in spite of all the advantages epigraphical studies or archaeology enjoy, they have certain limitations. And therefore, it is best in the interest of history that the historian doesn't ignore any type of sources and use them after proper scrutiny of the information they provide to extract facts from them. The value of inscriptions as a source of history, it is determined by their merits and demerits, as we will discuss here. Most of the inscriptions are found in open spaces withstanding changes in weather every year for many centuries. They are eroded by the sun or water from rains, and if such erosion damages an inscription, it results in loss of some text forever. Similar erosion is witnessed in metal plates in form of oxidation. If the script used in the inscription has not been deciphered yet, the text cannot be used by the historian, such as in the case of the seals found from the Indus Valley civilization. Similarly, if the old inscribed face of some inscription looks time worn, the letters may not be legible. Inscriptions without mention of dates do not help either. For example, the iron pillar edict from Mehrauli of the king Chandra. If an inscription fails to provide sufficient details about its issuer, it is a demerit. The identity of Chandra of the iron pillar inscription from Mehrauli is still not clear, as we do not get sufficient clues from the text itself. Other vital details which elevate an inscription to a valuable source include lineage of the king, names of royals, mention of geographical extent of the empire, proper elaboration of the purpose of the edict, etc. Now on this page we have some pictures. In the first picture you can see a pillar edict found at Sanchi. This pillar inscription is damaged, and you can see from the picture that some part of its text is lost forever. The second one is Gopika cave inscription of Anant Varman. Then we have the famous Junagadh rock edict and the Garud pillar inscription of Heliodorus. The boundaries of this classification sometimes blur when many of the inscriptions are found excellent piece of literature as per their language and style. Be it prose or poetry, the Prayag Prashasti of Samudragupta is such an example. Still, epigraphs suffer from limitation of space, which compels their author to be selective in their contents. Coins have much shorter space for inscriptions. Literature is not limited by any such constraint, and literary texts can be as long as its author wishes them to be. Therefore, literary sources can be lengthier, furnishing many more details to historian than an inscription can. In the year 1836, Norwegian scholar Christian Lesson first succeeded in deciphering many of the Brahmi alphabets. He used coins of Indo-Greek rulers Agathocles and Pantaleon, which had Greek and Brahmi script on their obverse and reverse sides of the coins. James Princip and Alexander Cunningham followed suit, and finally in year 1837, Princip published all Brahmi letters in the Journal of Asiatic Society of Bengal. It added a new dimension to the study of Indian history with use of inscriptions as a source to the story of our past. Being mirrors to the past, inscriptions draw an exact picture of their time for the historian. They also provide a glimpse of the unexplored zones unknown from literature. Epigraphical sources are not elaborative, as discussed above. Therefore, help from numismatics, paleography, archaeology, and literary sources is needed to fully understand the past. Inscriptions, along with other sources, are an excellent corroborative source of history. Much said, let's discuss a few examples to explain how epigraphy works for the historian. The world famous emperor Ashok is also known for his numerous inscriptions found from all over his vast empire. Prior to the 1960s, Ashok was only known from literary references, as his inscriptions mentioned him as Devanampriya, a title not known to historians then. It was for the discovery of two edicts from Maski and Gurjara, which bore his personal name Ashok along with the title Devanampriya, that these inscriptions were correctly attributed to Ashok. As you must have read in previous classes, we know how much the history of mighty Mauryas depends on these sources. Imagine absence of Ashokan edicts, and the subsequent lack of details for Mauryan history. Again, the policy of Ashok towards culling was reflected in the two separate edicts found at Dhauli and Jaugarh in Odisha. We all know that. Recently, another set of these two edicts was found from Sannati near Gulmarg, Karnataka in the year 1989. Now, why Ashok would plant these edicts far away from culling? It is very important to explain Ashokan policy towards provinces of his empire, and all this information can only be gleaned from his inscriptions. The Garud pillar inscription of Heliodorus from Besnagar is an important document in stone to explain not only development of Bhagavatism in ancient India, but also relations with other states. The grandson of Cheshtan, Rudradaman, is mostly known in history through his Junagadh edict. This edict tells about the victory of Rudradaman in conflict against the Satvahan ruler Shatkarni. It also narrates how administration worked during his reign, renovation of the Sudarshan Lake built during the times of Chandragupta Maurya, and other such achievements. Most of these would have remained unknown but for the Junagadh edict. We had a picture of Junagadh edict in the previous slides. Four or 5 miles away from Bhubaneswar is situated the Hathi Gumfa cave edict. We get elaborate details of the exploits of King Kharvel of Kaling, which is not much known from other sources. Military and diplomatic exploits of the Gupta Emperor Samudragupta are best known from his Prayag Prashasti. The history of Maharaja Bhulund of 5th century stands corrected by inscriptions found from a hoard of 27 copper plates from Dhar. Dhar is a district of Madhya Pradesh. Copper plate grants are also an excellent source to understand the development of feudalism in India. And again, it was the Ahol inscription of Pulkeshin II which informs us about defeat of Harshvardhan which is not discussed in any other contemporary source. Again, we have some pictures. First is the Ashokan edict found at Maski. Sannati edict of Ashok. This is a Pallav edict found at Mamalpuram. And finally, Gurjara edict of Ashok. Maski and Gurjara edicts of Ashok first mention his personal name, as we know. Another example is of the military exploits of Dharampal in the Hindu Kush region. These were described by a Sanskrit copper plate inscription of his successor Mahendrapal of 9th century. It mentions the defeat of Pratihar king Nagbhat II and also of an alliance with Dullabh Raj of the Chahmans. Similarly, another edict found near Hampi in the 1990s corrects the date of accession of Krishnadev Rai of Vijayanagar Empire by 1 year. Along with political history, as we discussed above, inscriptions also tell us tales of culture. Two inscriptions from Museum of Archaeology, Tirupati, mention the ragas, the tal and the sur as prevalent in the 16th century devotional literature. This is how inscriptions sometimes play the role of a corroborative evidence, testing authenticity of other sources. Sometimes they add vital details of the information to the information already acquired, and sometimes they are the only means to know what happened in history. Apart from the contents of an inscription, its script, language, mention date, used epithets, mention of neighboring states or their rulers, etc., also contribute considerably to history writing. Similarly, the place from where an inscription was found also interests the historian. As a thumb rule, edicts in ancient times were placed where large number of people could read it. It was because erecting inscriptions was a costly affair which was involved intense human labor. So this seemed logical that inscriptions were erected on places where high human traffic could be seen. Such examples are major routes to large cities or centers of commercial activities. Here we have a picture of edict at Vitthal temple, Hampi, and the next one is Bhitri inscription of Skandagupta. So in this class we learned that with more than 100,000 deciphered inscriptions, epigraphy has contributed a lot to reconstruction of history in India. Our ancient writings on stone and metal narrate the vivid story of every aspect of our age or culture. They also proved a biased hypothesis wrong, that Indians had no sense of history prior to the medieval times.